Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Sal, again, for doing this for us. Like, we are so looking forward to hearing your pick of the sutra. Thank you. Please take away.
Okay. This sutta that I will be reading is called Nutriment, and it can be found in the Samyutta Nikaya number 46.51, and I will be reading the translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. So, nutriment in this sutta means that what feeds the hindrances and the factors of enlightenment, so what makes them grow and become stronger. And the Buddha here also discusses their counterparts, and he calls it De-Nourishment. So that means the things that weaken the hindrances or weaken the factors of enlightenment. At Savatthi, Bhikkhus, I will teach you the nutriment and the de-nourishment in regard to the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of enlightenment. Listen to that. 1. The nutriments for the hindrances. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire? There is, bhikkhus, the sign of the beautiful, frequently giving careful attention to it is the nutriment for the frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire. So the sign of the beautiful is that you give attention to whatever you find pleasant, attractive, fun to do, like entertainment or noticing someone or something that you find attractive or appealing in some way. You start to latch on to that, so to speak. You start to hold on to that and mentally proliferate about that. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen ill will and for the increase and expansion of arisen ill will? There is, bhikkhus, the sign of the repulsive. Frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen ill will and for the increase and expansion of arisen ill will. So you don't pay attention to being mindful or watching the mind. You just let the mind go and you give attention to whatever you find unpleasant or what makes you angry. Notice also that the Buddha talks about careless attention. So Bhante Vimalaramsi often calls it letting the mind ho-hum around. And this is the opposite of paying attention to what the mind is doing in any given moment. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sloth and torpor and for the increase and expansion of arisen sloth and torpor? Sloth is physical laziness and torpor is mental laziness. So a sluggish and dull mind. There are, bhikkhus, discontent, lethargy, lazy stretching, drowsiness after meals, sluggishness of mind. Frequently giving careless attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sloth and torpor, and for the increase and expansion of arisen sloth and torpor. So a lot of these states might be might be making sense, but discontent, for instance, would be that it prevents us from seeing the reality clearly. So the mind in that state of being discontent is not really sharp and alert, and is very much involved in identifying with something. And this leads to a dull, disinterested mind. And in other suttas, the Buddha explains that alcohol and drugs also lead to a dull mind. So even when people take speed or other things that might instantly give rise to restlessness, but over time it would give a dull mind, not very mindful. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse, and for the increase and expansion of arisen restlessness and remorse? There is bhikkhus unsettledness of mind. Frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse, and for the increase and expansion of arisen restlessness and remorse. So this also includes giving frequent attention to things that create restlessness in the mind, like a hectic phase in parenthood, especially when now with COVID you need to balance teaching and entertaining your kids while you're working from home, or a busy job, or checking your phone continuously, playing video games all day long, basically jumping from one sensual pleasure to the next that would give rise to restlessness. And as for remorse, or you could also call it moral shame, remembering things from the past for which you blame yourself, and the breaking of precepts. You have that little voice nagging that keeps saying, I should not have done that, I should have handled things differently. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen doubt, and for the increase and expansion of arisen doubt? There are bhikkhus, things that are the basis for doubt. Frequently giving careless attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen doubt, and for the increase and expansion of arisen doubt. So unfortunately, the Buddha here doesn't go into detail of what these things are, but to mention a few, being overwhelmed by all kinds of different views, not knowing the difference between what is wholesome and unwholesome, good and bad, a lack of knowledge of the Dhamma, no access to the teachers that can explain things, or access to the suttas, not asking questions about that what you have doubt about, getting stuck in analyzing and overthinking, and last but not least, not meditating enough, because meditation develops wisdom. In a sense, one could say that doubt is the opposite of wisdom. And when you practice a lot and letting the time that you sit grow bit by bit, so that the mind can calm down and can get deeper, doubt will disappear by itself. And it will eventually become completely eradicated when you attain stream entry, because then you have learned for yourself what the Dhamma means and how you can attain Nibbana. So what you may have noticed is that basically we feed the hindrances by giving attention to them. And this is where in the practice of the 6 R's, the first and second step, the recognize and the release step, are crucial. First, you are able to recognize through mindfulness that the mind got involved in a hindrance, and the release step is where you turn that attention away from the hindrance, not by pushing it away or by tolerating it, but by turning the attention back to the mind and body and towards the relax step. The release step makes sure that you don't get more involved in that unwholesome state and get caught up in it, making it bigger and stronger. Two, the nutriments for the enlightenment factors. These 7 factors are in this order: mindfulness, investigation, or it's also called discrimination of states, effort, or it's also called energy or sometimes enthusiasm, rapture or joy, tranquility, collectedness, and equanimity. These 7 factors of enlightenment are developed within the jhanas, whether in meditation or in daily life. They will balance themselves within the practice, but you can also use them in the highest jhanas when the mind starts to lean towards dullness or towards restlessness, by very lightly intending a certain factor to become a bit more prominent. And that's all you need to do. It requires a very subtle intention, not forcefully trying to bring it up or personalizing it by thinking, I need to use this factor. And also, it's not that you need to juggle all these factors trying to balance them yourself. For the most part, this will happen naturally the deeper the mind gets, and you will probably only need to nudge a factor to help let go of restlessness or dullness of mind. And right intention is the forerunner of all these factors. Right intention is the second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, where you practice renunciation, non-ill will, and non-cruelty. And this is especially important because you let go of identifying with sensory experiences, let go of ill will by practicing the antidote, which is loving kindness, and let go of cruelty by practicing the antidote of compassion. And these factors all start with mindfulness. Mindfulness is the basis, so to speak, that will activate the factor of discrimination of states, which then activates the factor of effort, and so on. And the deeper one gets in a meditation, the more they start to get balanced. And when they are perfectly balanced, one can experience Nibbana. But the 7 factors are not only linear, going from mindfulness to equanimity, but they are also interdependent and cyclical. So you can't always really isolate one factor without other factors getting developed as well. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness? There are, bhikkhus, things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Again, here the Buddha doesn't specify what these things are, so I want to highlight some some of them that are helpful for the arising of mindfulness. First of all, right intention. After all, you can't let go of anything if there is no mindfulness present. You wouldn't be able to recognize what to let go of. Also, using the factor of investigation also encourages mindfulness to become stronger. Mindfulness and the factor of investigation are pretty much intertwined together with yoniso manasikara, or attention rooted in reality, as Delson likes to call it. And you use this in a relaxed way by seeing whatever arises as impermanent, impersonal, and subject to suffering. And also, the more you have the intention to be mindful, the more it will start to become automatic to have mindfulness arise, both in meditation and in situations in daily life. And practicing the 6 R's, right effort, also ensures that mindfulness is being practiced, starting with the first step of recognizing distraction. Mindfulness is important for every situation, whatever the state of mind happens to be, and both in the sitting and in daily life. You can have too much of the other factors, but you can't have too much mindfulness. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states? There are bhikkhus wholesome and unwholesome states, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states with their counterparts. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of energy, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of energy? There are bhikkhus the element of arousal, so making the sincere intention to practice and having the enthusiasm to do so. The element of endeavor, so actually doing it and enjoying doing so. The element of exertion, so really making an effort to continue to practice regularly and to make time for it. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of energy, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of energy. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of rapture, joy, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of rapture? There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of rapture. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of rapture, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of rapture. A few of these things that would be helpful to let joy arise and develop are seclusion. In the description of the jhanas, the Buddha often talks about secluded from sense pleasures and secluded from unwholesome states. And the fact that joy can arise from that seclusion, as you can see in the jhana factors of joy and happiness, gives a beautiful indication of the fact that sense pleasures also entail suffering. When you get secluded in the meditation, the mind feels a kind of relief and happiness to have the opportunity to rest and relax and enjoy pleasant, wholesome states of mind. This can bring up a lot of joy. Bringing up a wholesome state in mind also leads to joy, which can be very subtle. The factor of energy or effort, this factor precedes the factor of joy, and the enthusiasm to practice brings about joy. Also, the factor of tranquility. The factors of joy and tranquility are interconnected. When joy arises, you become calm, and becoming tranquil, for instance, when you had restlessness arise and you let go of that, relax, there can arise a subtle joy because you let go of such an unpleasant, unwholesome state. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of tranquility and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of tranquility? There are bhikkhus tranquility of body, tranquility of mind. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of tranquility and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of tranquility. So if you pay close attention, you can really notice if the body is restless, constantly adjusting your posture, pacing up and down, getting up to do things, perhaps even talking rapidly. And just the noticing of that can already help calm down the body. But also taking a walk, reading a book, listening to some relaxing music, taking a bath can also help calm down the body. As for calming the mind, not jumping around from one thing to the next in quick succession will definitely help. So not checking your phone and then switching to answer mails and 5 minutes later checking the phone again, perhaps turning off notifications, or maybe bringing up a memory where you remember that you are very calm and relaxed. Applying the 6 R's, all these things can help to bring up or strengthen the factor of tranquility. And of course, as is the case for all these factors, you can also strengthen the previous factor, which will lead to the next factor. In this case, as I said before, developing joy will lead to tranquility. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of collectedness and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of collectedness? There are bhikkhus the sign of serenity, the sign of non-dispersal. So the sign of serenity has been translated from samatha nimittang. Nimitta means sign or object, and samatha means tranquility or calmness of mind. So this talks about using tranquility as an object of attention. In other words, tranquility leads to samadhi, collectedness. Non-dispersal is translated from the Pali word abhiyaga, and that refers to not restless or non-distracted. So the sign of serenity evolves from relaxing, and the sign of non-dispersal is a mind that gives attention to and unifies around an object, in other words, collectedness. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of collectedness and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of collectedness. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of equanimity and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of the equanimity? There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of equanimity. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of equanimity and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity. Equanimity is a strong balance of mind. When you are equanimous, you don't get swayed by emotions as much. Whether pleasant or unpleasant things happen in daily life, the mind stays balanced, quiet, and more mindful. It has a sense of, it's okay, nothing disturbs you, the mind stays open, alert, and stable. The Buddha once said to Ananda, his personal attendant, that we should not get attached to anything at all. But if we were to get attached to one thing that was the least bad, so to speak, it should be equanimity. It's a very peaceful and useful state. So this balanced open mind provides an opportunity to make wiser decisions and to not get drawn into the ups and downs of life as much. For example, you won't panic when an accident happens, and you also will not be completely drunk with euphoria when winning the lottery, for example. You become more content and are able to see if a situation would benefit from you radiating, for instance, loving kindness or compassion. You can make better choices on what a situation needs and how to respond. Practically speaking, you develop a certain detachment through right intention. First, there were strong attachments to your experiences. Now you start to let go of wanting sensory experiences and identifying with them. And you also let go of ill will and cruelty. And detachment is not indifference, but something that evolves naturally, where you have let go more and more of the need to control and the need to distract the mind. You let go a bit more of the idea of I, me, and mine, thus creating more room in your heart for other beings. And another factor to encourage more equanimity is collectedness itself. So you may have noticed that the Buddha says quite frequently in this sutta that just the sheer giving attention to one of these 7 factors already helps them to come up and develop. 3. The de-nourishment of the hindrances. So this talks about how you can take away the fuel for hindrances to come up or how to weaken them if they are already present. As a general remark, Keeping the precepts is always crucial to calm the mind and to have less hindrances arise. This is the first thing to look at when hindrances are strong and persistent, or when enlightenment factors are weak. And what bhikkhus is the de-nourishment that prevents an arisen sensual desire from arising, and arisen sensual desire from increasing and expanding. There is bhikkhus the sign of foulness. Frequently giving careful attention to it is the de-nourishment that prevents an arisen sensual desire from arising, and arisen sensual desire from increasing and expanding. One example would be the practice that the Buddha frequently advised to monks who had left the home life behind and were still often caught in strong lust. The Buddha told them to practice the foulness of the body meditation, where you contemplate things like blood, pus, winds in the intestines. You contemplate the bones, the liver, and other organs. So if you don't want to experience lust and you notice an attraction to someone, you could also do a less dramatic form of that, like imagining them to be sitting on a toilet, or having snot come out of their nose, or imagine them without a skin. And that's very helpful to instantly let go of lust when you don't want that to happen. And what bhikkhus is the de-nourishment that prevents an arisen ill will from arising, and arisen ill will from increasing and expanding. There is bhikkhus the liberation of mind through loving kindness. Frequently giving careful attention to it is the de-nourishment that prevents an arisen ill will from arising, and arisen ill will from increasing and expanding. So in other words, this is one of the things that we already practice by doing Twim and doing the Brahma Viharas. You will notice that the more and the longer you practice, the more ill will start to fade away. And what bhikkhus is the de-nourishment that prevents unarisen sloth and torpor from arising, and arisen sloth and torpor from increasing and expanding. There are bhikkhus the element of arousal, the element of endeavor, the element of exertion. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the de-nourishment that prevents unarisen sloth and torpor from arising, and arisen sloth and torpor from increasing and expanding. In other words, the Buddha here refers to the enlightenment factor of effort. And what bhikkhus is the de-nourishment that prevents unarisen restlessness and remorse from arising, and arisen restlessness and remorse from increasing and expanding? There is bhikkhus peacefulness of mind. Frequently giving careful attention to it is the de-nourishment that prevents unarisen restlessness and remorse from arising, and arisen restlessness and remorse from increasing and expanding. And what bhikkhus is the de-nourishment that prevents unarisen doubt from arising, and arisen doubt from increasing and expanding? There are bhikkhus wholesome and unwholesome states, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states with their counterparts. frequently giving careful attention to them is the de-nourishment that prevents unarisen doubt from arising and arisen doubt from increasing and expanding. In other words, the factor of investigation counters doubt. Why? Because then you start to understand how the Dhamma truly works. You start to encourage wisdom by seeing for yourself what causes states in the mind to arise and pass away, and how we don't have any control over them. So this is what the Buddha means when he says that wisdom develops by practicing meditation, because in the meditation these 7 factors will develop and will counter, for instance, doubt. 4. The de-nourishment of the enlightenment factors. So this part talks about how the factors can't come up or won't be properly developed. Obviously, the quickest way to not have them come up would be to not meditate and practice at all. These enlightenment factors, all 7 of them, are very precious because they are crucial for our practice. Someone who has never ever meditated in their lives will not experience any of them. They might experience other forms of joy and other forms of equanimity, for example, but never these enlightenment factors, and thus they will not be able to attain Nibbana. And what bhikkhus is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness from arising and the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness from reaching fulfillment by development? There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Not frequently giving attention to them is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness from arising and the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness from reaching fulfillment by development. So, as I mentioned before about how to encourage mindfulness, here you could take the opposite of it. For instance, not developing right intention, so being hateful, angry, and cruel, indulging in sense pleasure and taking them personal. So, I want to do this, I need to have some fun. In fact, for the Buddhist path, it's crucial to develop all these 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, since they all work together for you to be able to let go of taking things personal, craving, and to see reality as it actually is. And another thing would be not being able or interested in investigating the mental states of mind, not interested in being mindful, and not correctly practicing right effort or even skipping right effort altogether. And what bhikkhus is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states from arising and the arisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states from reaching fulfillment by development? There are bhikkhus, wholesome and unwholesome states, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states with their counterparts. Not frequently giving attention to them is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states from arising and the arisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states from reaching fulfillment by development. So here you can see again that there is a clear link between the hindrance of doubt and the enlightenment factor of investigation. And what because is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of energy or effort from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of energy from reaching fulfillment by development? There are because the element of arousal, the element of endeavor, the element of exertion. Not frequently giving attention to them is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of energy from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of energy from reaching fulfillment by development. In short, not being interested in developing the practice and not making the effort. And what because is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of rapture from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of rapture from reaching fulfillment by development? There are because things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of rapture. Not frequently giving attention to them is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of rapture from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of rapture from reaching fulfillment by development. So not developing the previous factor of effort, not being secluded, not practicing the relaxed step, not creating a subtle intention for this factor to arise. And what because is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen factor of tranquility from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of tranquility from reaching fulfillment by development? There are because tranquility of body, tranquility of mind. Not frequently giving attention to them is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of tranquility from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of tranquility from reaching fulfillment by development. In short, things like not keeping the precepts, doing things that create restlessness in the mind or in the body, and paying no close attention to what is happening in the mind. And what because is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of collectedness from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of collectedness from reaching fulfillment by development? There are because the sign of serenity, the sign of non-dispersal. Not frequently giving attention to them is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of collectedness from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of collectedness from reaching fulfillment by development. So in short, not developing the previous factor of tranquility, restlessness, and having no peace of mind. And what because is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of equanimity from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity from reaching fulfillment by development? There are because things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of equanimity. Not frequently giving attention to them is the de-nourishment that prevents the unarisen enlightenment factor of equanimity from arising, and the arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity from reaching fulfillment by development. So to name a few, not cultivating the previous factor of collectedness, not developing detachment through the path factor of right intention. And for all these factors, you could say there are rather the Buddha says frequently paying attention or not frequently paying attention to them. So it's not a one-time thing that you need to do. Of course, all these things that were mentioned in this sutta to nurture the enlightenment factors and to weaken the hindrances are not a complete overview of what you can do to improve the meditation and daily life and what you might want to let go of. But crucial, I would say, to start with is keeping the 5 basic precepts and following all 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. And see the things that are mentioned here more as a starting point to investigate your own experiences, both in daily living and in meditation, and to see if you can make certain connections between what you do in daily life and what effect it has on the mind, or what effects hindrances and enlightenment factors have on your meditation experience. For instance, see what happens if you stop watching movies for a couple of days, or what effect it would have if you stop drinking tea and coffee, and what it does to the mind and the body. So experiment, not in a forceful way, but in a relaxed, interested, fun way. This is a journey, and one that can give rise to a lot of happiness.